Well, all right. Welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. My name is Katie Dean, and I'll be your speaker this evening. Um, the topic tonight for discussion is advanced diabetes nutrition, taking it to the next level. So we look forward to our Cecilia Health webinar this evening. Should you have any technical difficulties, there is a number at the bottom of the screen that you can call. It's 1-800-263-6317. Our format includes a short presentation followed by an interactive discussion. So to type in a question, you use the question section of the webinar toolbar, and you'll find that toolbar to the right of your screen if you're logged on through our GoToWebinar platform. If you're calling in this evening on your telephone, you won't be able to ask a question. You wouldn't be able to see a screen, of course, because you're just calling in. But you could hear kind of the presentation as well. So at the end, you'll have a chance to ask questions. So we look forward to an interactive webinar this evening. So just a disclaimer, we know that the information you're about to hear may motivate you to make lifestyle changes, but please consult your physician before making any changes to your current routine. This online Q&A session is intended to give general advice only. This information is not a substitute for personal medical advice and involves the professional opinion of the Cecilia Health Certified Diabetes Care and Education Specialist. Um, Michelle Dart was scheduled to be our leader this evening, and she had something come up last minute, and so she wasn't able to be with us. But my name is Katie. I am also a certified diabetes care and education specialist. I am a registered dietitian as well. I have been practicing in the field of nutrition and diabetes for gosh, close to 20 years now. And I've been specialized in diabetes for the last probably 12 or 13 years. And I've been with Cecilia Health since 2017. Um, so I'm so sorry for the last minute change, but my name is Katie and I'll be with you this evening. So our discussion tonight will include what is carbohydrate and where is carbohydrate found? Do I need to think about other nutrients other than carbs? What's glycemic index? How do I read a food label? What about fiber? Are sugar substitutes safe? And how do I manage my diabetes using carbohydrate counting? And then we want to make sure we leave, several minutes for questions and answers and sharing. So if anybody throughout the broadcast has any question or would like to share anything, please do so using your toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. So, all right. Just to start us off here, food is made up of three main nutrients. We have proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. They're all important, and our body needs and uses them all. The first up is protein. Protein is found in our animal products such as meats, fish, eggs, and cheese. Protein is also found in beans, dairy products. So milk is also a source of protein. Lean protein is best when choosing our meat. So that would be chicken and turkey. So without the skin, that would include fish, beans, and then low-fat dairy products are also leanest for us. The next group is fat. Fat is found in oil, butter, margarine, salad dressings, nuts, avocados. So plant-based fats are the healthiest for us, and particularly those that are highest in monounsaturated fats. So those are the healthiest for our heart, and you're going to find those in avocados and avocado oil, olives and extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, and nut butters like peanut butter and so forth. Um, So with our fats, of course, we have to pay attention to portion size is real important with fats since they are so dense, nutrient dense. They have a lot of calories for just a small portion. So things like salad dressing, butter, oil, margarine, mayonnaise. Portion control on all foods, but particularly fats, if you're kind of watching your weight, which is an important part of diabetes, right? Keeping ourselves at a healthy weight. So um, next up is carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is important, and we'll talk more in depth about carbohydrate because it is the main food group that impacts our blood sugars. And so that's really kind of what most people with diabetes focus on. Of course, all nutrients are important, but carbs are certainly very important. So there are three types of carbohydrates. We have sugars, starches, and fibers. And carbohydrates are found in starches, fruits, milk, and sugar, of course. And when we say sugar, that means like added sugars. So when things like cakes, cookies, pies, desserts, that kind of stuff. So we'll go through these in more detail as well. But those food groups there are the highest in carbohydrate. Our starch group, our fruit group, and our milk group. Milk group includes milk and yogurt usually because cheese is more protein and more low carb. So, all right. So, what is carbohydrate? It's the main nutrient in food that raises blood sugar levels. I think we've already discussed that. The amount and type of carbohydrate you eat determines how quickly your blood sugar level changes after eating. So, certainly, carbohydrates in their liquid form, like from sugary drinks, even fruit juice, will raise your blood sugar very quickly. Okay, so our body doesn't have to work very hard to digest liquid carbohydrates or liquid sugars, and so the effect is almost immediate or within 10 to 15 minutes after consuming a drink with sugars, that it kind of spikes your blood sugar. um, Carbohydrates from more solid foods, especially like our whole grain foods with more fiber, they're digested a little bit slower, and so you'll see the rise in your blood sugar is slower when you eat whole grain, kind of healthier carbohydrates from solid foods, not the liquid sugars, but more solid. So, all right. So foods that have very little or no carbohydrate would be the other food groups. So non-starchy vegetables is up first, and that's a real important group because um, you can use these foods as fillers. Fill up on these high fiber, non starchy vegetables because they have very little carbohydrate naturally. There's tons of fiber. There's tons of vitamins and minerals. So you see in the picture there's lots of different foods, but we have a picture of bell peppers, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, different, even carrots are non starchy. So, contrary to popular belief, carrots are pretty low carb. um, so other examples would be green beans, we've got cauliflower, we've got asparagus, we've got cabbage. Certainly any leafy green is very low in carbohydrate. So we can eat larger portions of these foods and fill up on these foods with more volume for fewer calories and much fewer carbohydrates. So um, so other foods that have carbohydrates would be our fats, right? Butter, oil, margarine. We talked about those. Eggs, of course, are a protein source. So our protein sources, meats, fish, poultry, have very little carbohydrate naturally. And then so we have cheese and nuts as well. And we talked about nuts and nut butters, and those are more heart healthy monounsaturated fats. So these foods don't have the ability to influence our blood sugar quite like those high carbohydrate foods do. So we need all foods in our diet, though. Okay, so what you eat, how much you eat, and kind of when you eat, all affects your blood sugar levels. So one thing that you'll really hear if you ever kind of do any research on diabetes or meet with a dietitian or meet with your health coach through Cecilia Health is balanced meals is real important when it comes to kind of keeping blood sugar levels more steady and stable and more well controlled. So this says here, how high your blood glucose levels go will depend on if you're having a mixed meal, which to me that means a balanced meal. So a source of protein, a source of carbohydrate, and then of course plenty of vegetables. Usually along with that protein, you'll have fat. So fat is another important food group that, again, fat doesn't necessarily raise blood sugar, but it's very important because fat slows down digestion, and when we have fat and fiber present with carbohydrate, it slows down the rise in the blood sugar because it slows down digestion. So, for example, if you had a bowl, excuse me, of say plain white rice or plain white pasta with nothing else along with it, your body would digest that pretty quickly and it would spike your blood sugar pretty quickly. It would also leave you feeling pretty hungry shortly thereafter, right? That wouldn't really hold you very long. So say you had that same sort of meal, but maybe you had like brown rice or whole wheat or whole grain pasta. Say you had a lean grilled chicken breast or some sort of lean meat or fish with the small amount of rice, and then say you had lots of vegetables with the meal. So that adds more fiber. It adds some healthy fats. We do have that carbohydrate, right, which our body does need because that's its preferred source of energy. So we do need carbohydrates in our diet, but we have the protein and fat and fiber to kind of help slow down digestion, which slows down the rise in our blood sugar. It actually helps to keep us fuller for a longer period of time. So that's a balanced meal in that way is much healthier for us, and it will really serve our body more than say just plain white rice. So okay, so here are some examples here. A burger on a bun with salad will raise your blood sugar much slower than just the plain bun would alone. And that's because of the example I just shared. You've got, say, if you just had the bun or just had that bowl of rice, that's just pretty much all carbohydrate. But if you add a little protein and fat from the burger, maybe some healthy fat from some, vinaigrette-based salad dressing there, you've got all the veggies, which gonna kind of help provide you with that fiber, provides that bulk in your belly, which keeps you fuller for a longer period of time. Um, so that's an example of kind of a balanced meal. All right, so glycemic index. So what is glycemic index? It's a measure of how quickly your blood sugar levels will rise in response to different types of foods. So only carbohydrate containing foods have a glycemic index. So you'll see that on the right of your screen, a high glycemic index is any food with a score of 70 or above. A medium glycemic index is a food with a score of 55 to 69. And a low glycemic index food is a food with a score of 54 or less. So glycemic index is popular, or it seems to be. I get lots of questions about it. You can find a glycemic index of foods usually online. If you kind of did a little Google search, you should find a pretty accurate source of the glycemic index of foods. So it's just one way to look at carbohydrates and how quickly they'll raise your blood sugar. There's lots of ways to kind of do your meal planning, but this is certainly important. And it just takes into account those other factors, like how much fiber is present in the food, how quickly it's digested, and how quickly it's going to raise your blood sugar. So. All right, so high glycemic index foods will raise your blood sugar very quickly. So you see within 15 minutes of eating. And examples would be white bread, bagel, cornflakes, puffed rice cereal, bran flakes, instant oatmeal, rice pasta, potatoes, pumpkin, pretzels, rice cakes, popcorn, saltine crackers, melons, and pineapple. So notice those are all carbohydrates, a few fruits thrown in there. Pumpkin, I guess, is a vegetable or a squash, so kind of a starchy vegetable. But those fruits you notice, melons and pineapples, have a high glycemic load. When we eat those foods, we don't consume skin, and so we don't consume as much fiber as we would say as if we had like an apple with skin. That's gonna have a kind of a lower glycemic load. Um, Low glycemic foods have a more modest effect on your blood sugar levels, and it may take a bit longer to see a rise. So 100%, so examples of low glycemic index foods would be 100% whole wheat or whole grain bread, pumpernickel bread, rolled or steel cut oats. So notice the difference between instant oats with a higher glycemic index and whole grain rolled or steel cut oats with a lower glycemic index. Oat bran, muesli, barley, bulgur, sweet potatoes, particularly with skin, corn, yams, lima or butter beans, peas, legumes and lentils, most fruits, and non-starchy vegetables and carrots. Those are going to have a lower glycemic load, um, a lower glycemic index, I guess you could say. All right, how is the glycemic index useful in making food choices? So you should choose more foods that are lower glycemic index as they'll raise your blood sugar levels less and more gradually. And you'll likely feel fuller for a longer period of time from those foods. So kind of like what we talked about earlier, white unrefined grain, I'm sorry, refined grains, not unrefined, but white refined grains, fruit juices, things like that are digested really quickly, and so you'll see a spike in your blood sugar quickly. If you choose lower, more whole grain, whole foods, your body digests those a little. Your body has to work a little bit harder to break those down, digest them slower, so they keep you feeling fuller for a longer period of time, and you'll see a slower rise in your blood sugars. So when you choose high glycemic index foods, you should monitor your blood sugar levels after eating to see how high it goes. I would probably wait 1.5 to 2 hours after the start of a meal to test my blood sugar levels to see, in fact, how my body responded to that meal. So we call this paired testing sometimes. You can test just if you're curious, and I think this is very useful in determining how your body responds to different foods, different combinations of foods. You can test before you eat a meal and you wait about 2 hours after eating that meal just to see how high your blood sugar level rises with that meal. So I think we call that paired testing, and that is useful and just kind of helping you make different food choices. So reading food labels. There is a lot to kind of look at on a food label, and I could probably teach a whole class on reading food labels, but we'll kind of break it down just pretty generally. So the first thing I would always look at is the top that says, it says start here, and that's your serving size. So you always want to look at the serving size first because all of the information based on all the information in the food label, especially that within those two bold lines there, calories, fats, sodium, carbs, sugars, all that, it's all based on one serving. So you'll see serving size at the top, and then you'll see how many servings there are per container. So for this particular food, it's a half a cup, which is about 114 grams. And then there are 4 servings in this container. So that means that if you eat 1 serving of this food, that is 90 calories. However, if you consumed the whole box or the whole bag, you would have to multiply everything by 4. And so instead of 90 calories, that would be then 360 calories. And instead of 3 grams of fat in 1 serving, that would be 12 grams of fat. So and so forth. So it's very important to not skip over the very top, which is the serving size. I would always, if I could, try to limit myself to 1 serving of the food. I just think that that's just kind of a general good practice. So calories are important, and you'll also see calories from fat. You want to limit these nutrients, those that are in orange, and that's fats, saturated fats, cholesterol, and sodium. So fats, particularly saturated and trans fats, we want to limit on a food label, or we want to limit those, I guess, in our diet as best we can. And we want to replace those fats with healthier fats like mono and polyunsaturated fats, like we talked about. Extra virgin olive oil, avocados, we should always use that kind of oil to cook with at home if we can. And then trans fat, of course, it's a man-made fat. So it's not found, in nature very often. So it's going to be found in foods that are fried commercially, and it's going to be found in things that are processed and that sit on a shelf for a long time. So processed foods, things like snack cakes, Twinkies, Ho-Hos, all that kind of stuff, is going to have trans fat in it. This is not healthy for our heart. However, remember the fats are not raising our blood sugar. So fat has little impact on your blood sugar levels. Cholesterol is going to be found only in animal products, so meats, fish, eggs, dairy. You won't find cholesterol in grains like crackers, you know, you won't find cholesterol in vegetables or fruits or anything like that, just animal products. Sodium, of course, is important to look at just for heart health and blood pressure. Our processed foods are going to have sodium and salt added. Naturally occurring foods like meats, fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables that haven't been processed at all are going to be very, very low in sodium naturally. So sodium is a flavor enhancer and a preservative. So it's going to be added to those processed foods, things in a box, a bag, or a can. So, all right. And then total carbohydrate. That's super important. And what we want to focus on as well as those other things, but it's important because it gives us the most impact on our blood sugar. So you see total carbohydrate grams in this particular food for half a cup serving. There's 13 grams of carbohydrates. However, this food is particularly a good source of fiber, I'd say. You see dietary fiber and you see sugars that are indented and underneath the total carbohydrate. So that means that sugars and fibers on a food label are included in the total carbohydrate gram number already. So if you just kind of quickly in a hurry, I would glance at the serving size and then scroll down to the total carbohydrate grams. Many people like carbohydrate counting when they're looking at foods. They may, and we'll get into that in a little more detail here in a minute, but total carbohydrate grams is important. The sugars and fibers are already included in that number. So something to think about. To the right, and you see it in blue here, you'll see the percent daily value. That is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So some of us need more than that every day, and some of us need far less than that every day. So I always tell patients to just focus on the actual numbers in the food and not necessarily the percentage of their daily value. So that's all that means is that like this particular food, half a cup or one serving of this food provides like 5% of their total daily fat um, intake. All right, so we kind of went through this already. You want to check the ingredient list as well. So you'll find this at the bottom of the nutrition facts panel. Ingredients are listed in descending order by weight. So that means those first few ingredients in a food label are going to be what that food is composed of the most. So you want to look for whole grains to be the first ingredient instead of enriched or processed or anything like that. You want to look for words that mean sugar as well, because as we know, looking at food labels, it will rarely say sugar. It will say sugar in other forms. So anything that ends in OSE is going to be a sugar. So dextrose, maltose, fructose, maltose, those sorts of things are just another word for sugar. You may see cane sugar on a food label, corn sweetener, corn syrup solids, evaporated cane juice, fruit juice concentrates, high fructose corn syrup, malt syrup, concentrated fruit juice, maltodextrin. So these are just other words for sugar, and so you certainly wouldn't want to see any of these words as one of the first few ingredients on the food. Another thing to look at in the ingredient listing is the word partially hydrogenated oils. If you see that on a food label, it means that the food does contain trans fats, and that's, remember what we spoke of a little bit earlier, and that's not as healthy for our fat. So all right, so what about fiber? Fiber is important. It's a carbohydrate just like the sugars and starches are, but it's not completely broken down by the body, and so it doesn't contribute usually to blood sugar rise and to any calories or energy of the food. So on the food label, fiber is listed under the total carbohydrate. We just said that a second ago. But because fiber doesn't necessarily raise blood glucose levels, certain types of fiber don't. Um, Most people like to subtract the grams of fiber from the total carbs on a food label. So that can that can be helpful for some people, especially if you're using carbohydrate counting in your diet, or if you're dosing your insulin based on the carbohydrate level of the food. So fiber is our friend. Fiber is a good thing. It helps us stay fuller. It's healthier for our heart. Some types of fiber can actually help to carry cholesterol out of our body. So fiber is super friendly for our heart and also for our diabetes. So, um, all right. What about sugar substitutes? And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about sugar substitutes. Um, every practitioner you talk to will probably have a different opinion regarding sugar substitutes. However, research is showing that sugar substitutes contribute very little to our blood glucose levels or not at all to our blood glucose levels. However, they're not they're man-made. They're not naturally found in nature. So stevia is more, I guess we could call it a little bit more natural because it's based on the leaves of the stevia plant, which is an actual plant that is grown. So just a little word on those. If you do choose to use these sugar substitutes in place of real sugar, they're very much sweeter. They taste a little bit different than regular sweetener. I'm sure you've noticed if you've tried them. If you go from drinking, tea sweetened with real sugar to tea sweetened with, Splenda or stevia or something like that, you'll notice a different taste. However, they can be helpful for some people that do like a sweet taste when they drink. But they don't want the rise in the blood sugar because we certainly wouldn't want to be drinking large amounts of sugar sweetened beverages because that would raise our blood sugar. So all right, so other sugar substitutes to note are sugar alcohols. So you'll see this in an ingredient listing to the right of our screen using xylitol, but you'll see this on a food label. These end in, if you look in the ingredient listing, these end in OL. So we have erythritol, glycerol, isomalt, lactitol, maltitol, mannitol, sorbitol, xylitol. So those are commonly seen on a food label. Even though they're called sugar alcohols, they don't contain alcohol. You'll find these sometimes in sugar-free desserts and candies as well. Like if you see, if you often shop for sugar-free cookies or, chocolate candies or turtles or things like that, you might find sugar alcohols included on the ingredient listing. They're typically less sweet than real sugar. They provide half of the calories. So since half the carbohydrate of sugar alcohols is not absorbed by the body, you can subtract half of the sugar alcohol grams from the total carbohydrate grams on the food label. Um, so kind of like with the fiber, sugar alcohols, kind of come through the digestive tract undigested, we can say. However, I have experienced personally and other patients, it's real common that if you consume foods that have sugar alcohols, that they have kind of a laxative effect. And they can cause some gas, bloating, and things like that for a lot of people. So just kind of a word of caution. I think they're fine in moderation. However, I feel like me personally and other people that I know, can be affected by these. So you would want to kind of use, if you're eating sugar-free desserts and candies and things like that, you just kind of practice moderation and portion control. And just remember, because a food says sugar-free on a food label, it doesn't necessarily mean it's carbohydrate-free. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's no impact on your blood sugars. So All right, so carbohydrate counting, it can be done by anyone. It doesn't have to be done by somebody that, has diabetes. It's can be helpful for people who are dosing, their meals with rapid acting insulin. So to be pretty accurate with carbohydrate counting, it's best to use measuring cups and a food scale. Lots of reference, either books or tools or apps. There's tons of apps out there that can help us in kind of identifying, the carbohydrate content of foods. Before eating, measure or weigh your portions and look up the grams of carbohydrate that portion has in a reference tool. If the food has a food label, that is certainly an easy thing to use to kind of help you kind of count those carbohydrates. If you're not taking rapid acting mealtime insulin, try to keep your grams of carbohydrate consistent for each meal. Not the same foods at every meal, but just the same amount of carbohydrate at each meal. And this can keep blood sugar levels more steady and stable. So we call that kind of consistent carbohydrate meal planning. So if you've spoken with your dietitian and you want to count carbs, and she or he has calculated how many carbs you need per meal, this can be a great tool. If you take rapid acting insulin, you can speak with your doctor or your diabetes coach about how to dose your insulin based on how much carbohydrate you're eating. By checking your blood sugars 2 hours after your meals, you can determine the proper dose for the carbohydrates that you like to eat. So, all right, so here's an example of how you would use carbohydrate counting. So for a food that is found in nature, like an apple, that does not have a food label, it's best to use a scale. So a small apple, about 3 ounces. And then, so a 3-ounce apple has about 15 grams of carbohydrate, and we can use a reference tool to tell us that. A larger apple, a medium to a larger size apple, is going to have probably closer to 30 grams of carbohydrate, depending on how large the apple is, possibly even 45 grams of carbohydrate. So portions matter a lot. And then, so the next thing we want to do is measure out the peanut butter. So you'll see on a food label or a jar of peanut butter that 2 tablespoons is a portion. So you'd want to measure that out. You see that 2 tablespoons of peanut butter has 6 grams of carbohydrate, depending on the type of peanut butter you use. Of course, there's natural peanut butter, there's reduced fat peanut butter, there's peanut butter with different flavorings and things like that. So always check your label. But for this particular snack, an apple with peanut butter, we have a 3-ounce apple, which is 15 grams of carbohydrate, plus the 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, which is another 6 grams of carbohydrate, which is 21-gram carbohydrate snack, which is a good range, depending on, kind of your meal plan and what your coach or your doctor or your dietitian has given you. A good range for carbohydrates can be anywhere from 15 to 30 grams for a snack. So all right, here's an example of how you would use carbohydrate counting at a mealtime. So this particular meal consists of a chicken breast with rice, broccoli, and some pudding. So first of all, you'd want to measure out your portion of rice. It measures 2/3 of a cup. You want to measure your portion of broccoli. Excuse me, it measures 1 cup. You want to measure the pudding, it's a 1/2 a cup. Remember, chicken is a protein, so it doesn't have carbohydrate unless you're adding something to it, right? Chicken on its own does not have carb, but if you're breading it and frying it, of course, that has carbohydrate you'd have to account for. If you're adding a sauce like barbecue sauce, honey mustard, gravy, something like that, that adds carbohydrate. But for this particular example, it's just a plain chicken breast, maybe with some seasoning, right? Onion, garlic, those types of things, maybe just a little seasoning on top. So we don't account for any carb for the chicken. So your reference tool tells you that 1/3 of a cup of cooked rice has 15 grams of carbohydrate. but we know that we have 2/3 of a cup of cooked rice, so that's going to be 30 grams, right? So that's twice the serving there. So 30 grams for the rice. Your reference tool tells you that 1 cup of broccoli has about 6 grams of carb. It also tells you, or the label on your pudding tells you that 1/2 a cup has about 25 grams of carb. So this obviously isn't a sugar-free pudding. So we just add all that together. We add 30 for the rice. We add 6 for the broccoli. We add 25 grams for the pudding. Remember, no carbs for the chicken. So that particular meal, with dessert, right, contains about 61 grams of carbohydrate. So a good range for meals can be anywhere from 40 to 60 grams of carb, usually for a male. For a woman, it also, of course, depends on your activity level and your size and your age as well. Usually anywhere from 30 to 45 grams for a meal, for a woman can be a that's a general rule, right? If you want a kind of a more specific plan, you'd need to see your dietitian. But all right, so tips and tricks for successful, easy carbohydrate counting. We tend to go back and eat the same foods again and again. So once you've measured and calculated the carbs, you don't need to do it again and again each time. Keeping a food label, or keeping a food journal can be helpful with this. Kind of just writing what you're eating, kind of calculating the carbs and keeping it in a notebook. Also, there are tons of apps out there that can, some are free, most are free, in fact, that can be super helpful with this. I like Lose It, MyFitnessPal, Calorie King. There's a calorie counter. There's some diabetes specific apps that have, food logs and things like that that can help you kind of count. So those are kind of some tips and tricks, is just saying, really, when you get started, really kind of trying to measure out at first. As you go along and you get more comfortable, you'll be able to eyeball your portions and know about how much carbohydrate are in the foods that you commonly eat. However, it's always a good practice to every once in a while just go back and measure again. So like, say if you're eating cereal commonly and you measure it out and you know exactly how much carb it has. We're only human, and so over time, I feel like sometimes our portions grow a little bit. So it's always helpful to, a month, 2 months later, however often you think might work best for you, just to go back and measure it and just to make sure you're still on track with your portion, because that's going to affect the carbohydrate content. So also many foods have a label, so that makes it easy to count the carbs. But for fresh foods, you'd want to use some of those references that we talked about, like apps, or you can find lots of this information, little books and journals, those kinds of things. All right, so in summary, today's presentation, you should have gained some increased knowledge and understanding of the following advanced diabetes nutrition topics. So what foods contain carbohydrates and which foods do not. What's the GI, or the glycemic index, and how does it relate to my blood sugars? What are important items to read on a food label? How does fiber affect my health and my diabetes? What are sugar substitutes, and what are they safe to use? And how do I count carbohydrates to better control my blood sugars? So now it is time for any questions that you might have. We've kind of covered a variety of topics. So if you have questions, please use your question section of your webinar toolbar, and you can ask any questions there. Let me see. It looks like we might have a couple of questions, or at least one coming through. So feel free to use that toolbar and ask any questions, or if you'd like to just share a comment, maybe something that's worked for you, or anything you'd like to share. This one that came through, oh, okay, I understand. It is good. It's saying, what about potatoes? I thought I saw them in the non-starchy vegetable picture. And thank you for asking that question. I wanted to address that. You did, in fact, see potatoes in that picture. There were a couple other items in that picture that weren't necessarily non-starchy. I didn't mention them, but I'm glad that you saw that. So potatoes and sweet potatoes and corn and beans and peas are starchy vegetables. So for the purpose of diabetes meal planning, we don't count them as a vegetable. Remember, when we say vegetables, we mean non-starchy vegetables. And so potatoes and sweet potatoes would count actually as a starch. So half a cup of a potato or a sweet potato has about 15 grams of carbohydrate, which is going to be like one carbohydrate serving. So excuse me. So thank you for asking that question. Let's see if any other questions are coming through. Um, all right, I see some raised hands, but please feel free. I wonder if that's so we can't verbally ask and answer questions on this platform, but if you do have any, please put them into the um, question and answer section. It looks like I have one here that just came through. It says sourdough bread has a glycemic index of 55 and regular white bread has anywhere from 70 to 90. So now I mostly use sourdough bread and it is great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I 100% agree with you. Sourdough bread is more diabetes friendly. Of course, the portion and the amount that we use is important. It does have a lower glycemic index. It also has less gluten in it. It's kind of if you've ever made sourdough bread from scratch, you start with that starter and it has, some enzymes that are breaking down part of the wheat of the bread. And so it's more easily digested by most people. And we see here that it does have a lower glycemic index. So thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. And that is a great tip. Um, all right, we have one coming through here. It says, "What about nuts? What are the best to snack on? Cashews versus peanuts?" Okay, so nuts are. This is a great question. Nuts are a source of heart healthy fat. So nuts are great. They're very diabetes friendly. So they can make great snacks in between meals. They keep us full, right, on fewer carbohydrates. So nuts are high in that monounsaturated heart healthy fat. So they're, like I said, they're low in carb. However, we do have to watch our portions pretty closely on nuts because they're very nutrient dense. They're high in fat, but they of course make a great snack. Um, when you say the best types of nuts to snack on, so walnuts and almonds, I would say, are highest in um, what is it? The omega-3 fats. I couldn't put my finger on it. Particularly walnuts are highest in that omega-3 fat. You've heard of that's very heart healthy. You've heard of doctors recommend fish and fish oil. It's because of those omega-3 fats. So walnuts are super high in that. However, all nuts are healthy for you and they're higher in that monounsaturated fat. So you have a question here about cashews versus peanuts. I think they're both fine. I wouldn't really pick one over the other. I think all nuts are great. If you absolutely had to pick one for you, I would say walnuts or almonds. Some people like Brazil nuts. Those are a little bit larger nuts. They're quite expensive, but they're highest in a nutrient called selenium, and that supports healthy digestion and healthy hormone levels. But again, all nuts are wonderful and great for diabetes. They're very diabetes friendly. Just have to watch your portion size is all. So, all right. Any other questions or comments coming through? We can wait just a few more minutes. If anyone would like to share just a healthy tip, anything, we're all ears. I feel like we're all in this together, and some of, we can all learn from each other because everybody, is in this together and in this journey of healthy eating, and I think we learn best from each other. So if anybody else has anything else to share, we'll give another couple of minutes. Here we have one. It says popcorn, how best to enjoy. So this is a great question. Air popped popcorn without too much salt or too much butter can be a healthy snack. Okay, so 3 cups of popped popcorn is only 1 carbohydrate serving. So I like popcorn because you get a lot of bang for your buck, as they'd say. So you get a lot of volume for a small amount of carbs and calories. So 3 cups of popped popcorn, kind of visualize that serving is only 1 serving of carbohydrate, so it's about 15 grams. I would say air popped, and without the butter and the too much salt. But popcorn is a whole grain, so I mean it can be a healthy, filling, snack, and it also, sometimes feels like a little treat. So air pop popcorn can be a great, kind of diabetes friendly snack. Just make sure you watch your portion for sure. So as with all foods, right? Got to watch our portion. All right, anybody else have any other questions? We have a few more minutes. All right, so the next question came through. It says, how about ice cream? And I'm assuming you're asking about a healthy, or not a healthy. I'm assuming you're asking, is it okay to have ice cream? Um, you know, half a cup of ice cream, which is a very small portion, usually, has about 15 grams of carbohydrate. It's mostly added sugars. Of course, there is some natural sugars found in popcorn because it's milk and dairy based. But ice cream is something I probably wouldn't recommend. Maybe a small portion if you just love ice cream every now and then. However, there's other options. There's like ice cream. There's some other options there. So I wouldn't call ice cream kind of like a diabetes friendly food. But if you absolutely love ice cream in a small portion, I think it's just fine to enjoy. um, I would just keep a small portion. So in our house, I've got a lot of ice cream lovers. We buy the individual little cups of ice cream, the little kind of little bitty party cups. So that helps us cut down our portion. I think each one is only half a cup, so it's easy to enjoy in a small portion. But if we get the gallon of ice cream and we eat and sit down with the whole gallon, then we're likely to overeat and then kind of have too much carbohydrate in one sitting. But that's a great question. Thank you. Um, all right, the next one says, is alcohol allowed? It's hard to say. I would check with your doctor on that. The American Heart Association says it is okay to enjoy 1 alcoholic beverage for a woman per day and two alcoholic drinks for a man per day. Um, I think they say that red wine has been shown to have some health benefits. It's high in it has, or it's not high, but it has a source. It's called that resveratrol that I think studies have shown to be, I guess, okay for your heart or heart healthy. However, I would always check with your doctor. I think that the recommendation has been made that if you do drink alcohol, keep your portion small. So 1 drink for a woman, 2 drinks for a man is okay. And by drink, I mean, I think an ounce of liquor, 1 beer, or one like 5-ounce glass of wine. But the recommendation I do know from the Heart Association has been made that if you do drink alcohol, keep it to that portion, but don't necessarily start drinking alcohol just for those heart benefits of like the red wine that I was saying. So always check with your doctor, but that's a great question. Oh, another thing about alcohol is it does contain carbohydrates, so you do have to account for that in your meal plan. Um, Certainly, I would choose something unsweetened. If you were drinking like a hard alcohol mixed with something, I would make sure I was mixing it with, something that didn't have any sugar at all. Certainly, mixed drinks, frozen drinks like daiquiris, margaritas, things like that can be very, very high in sugar. So I would probably steer clear from those. But check with your doctor, but I think it could be okay to enjoy an alcoholic beverage occasionally. Um, Let's see. Oh, good. We have another healthy tip that came through. It says we have fruit bars made with real cream called Johnny Pops in Minneapolis, and these are only 15 grams of carbs. And it says they're delicious. So that is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like to me this is probably like maybe some sort of semi-homemade, cream bar with fruit, maybe not quite as many, as many carbohydrates. So thank you for sharing. Um, all righty. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We've kind of come to the end of our time together. I so appreciate the questions and the interaction and the sharing. That's what makes what we do really fun. So if you have any questions, you could always reach out to your coach. Excuse me, any questions that we didn't get to. Our next webinar or live event is coming up on August 17th, and it's about blood sugar boot camp, the ins and outs of blood sugar testing. So if you have more, any questions about those, you can always ask your coach. Additional resources for Cecilia Health, we have a Facebook group and we also have a blog. The links are listed there, ceciliahealth.com. And I believe that is all we have for this evening. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate your attendance and your participation. So everyone have a great rest of your evening.